Thank you all for coming out. I noted tonight in Olympia there are several great events happening, which is not unusual, but I appreciate that all of you made it to this one tonight. It's a special night for Craig and I, and for our daughter Sarah. I'd like to introduce Sarah. She's in the back there because she was very much a part of this process, and also our son-in-law Kelly, who's sitting right next to her. I'm really glad that they're with us tonight. I just want to say a few words about Abu Hussein. You've all read the information, I imagine, that we circulated about how since 1976 he's been working on human rights issues impacting Palestinians in the occupied territories and Israel. And some of those issues include land confiscation, discrimination, and political imprisonment. Hussein was the co-founder of the Arab Association of Human Rights. I should say that that's based in Nazareth. It's a place Craig and I have visited numerous times. They've held events for us when we've been in the Middle East. He was the chair of Intijah, the Union of Arab Community-Based Associations, and he is currently the chair of Adallah, which is the legal center for Arab minority rights in Israel. I want to speak, though, for just a couple minutes about Hussein personally, because in 2005, as our family was approaching a point at which the statute of limitations in Israel would prevent us from taking any legal action, and the United States government, actually through a letter from Larry Wilkerson, had told us that it was their opinion that the investigation into Rachel's case had not met the standard of being thorough, credible, and transparent, but that they really felt there was little more they could do. We decided that wasn't adequate, and we decided that we would take, or would see if we could take legal action through a civil lawsuit in Israel. And through the recommendation of a very dear friend who's been very involved in our case throughout this whole process, we came to know Hussein. And without ever meeting us in person, it was all over the telephone, he agreed to take us on. And it was not an easy task, and we're so grateful. Hussein lives in Fahim, which is in the triangle part of Israel, in the northern part of the country, not far from the Galilee. You might be more familiar with that. But he works a lot in Haifa, in Jerusalem, in the court system, in the legal system, and doing much more as well. We've come to know his family and to know him well. They're very dear to all of us. And I just want to say that one of the most, I think, remarkable things about our experience working with Hussein is that he incorporated us into this process. He allowed us to be able to help every step of the way. And we worked hard, all of us. Sarah worked very hard. Craig and I worked very hard. One of the things about the Israeli courts is that there are no juries. A judge hears the case. And I think most of you know that that meant that our case stretched out over a very long period of time. And that leaves you time then in between sessions to do some preparation and that kind of thing. So we all worked very hard. But I want to share that when I walked into the courtroom on those court dates and I sat down in the chair, I can still feel how palpable the relief was that I got to sit there and just observe what happened. And this man took over. And all of us were struck with his dignity, with his skills, with his care, certainly for all of us. And I'm just so happy that we have a chance to share with him with you tonight. I want to share one story about dignity, because the Israeli courts, I will say, from our experience, compared to being in American courts, where I've been on juries and so forth, at least in Thurston County, it's a different kind of decorum. They're very volatile places. The judges and the lawyers yell at each other. But Hussein was very dignified in that setting. I'll just tell this one anecdote. At one point, the judge turned to Hussein and said, I believe you've never been in the Israeli military. I suppose you've never been in the Israeli military. And Hussein very quietly looked at the judge and said, I'm proud to say I never served in the Israeli military. The combatants for peace and other Israelis, because it was all in Hebrew, who were sitting next to our family and translating for us, nearly erupted in applause. You know, I mean, they wanted to applaud. There were some hilarious moments during this process. So I just wanted you to know that. I'm going to start by sharing a bit about Rachel, but I want you to know that for Hussein, I think this is remarkable. In the courtroom, of course, everything was in Hebrew. So he, like many Palestinian Israelis, spoke fluently in Hebrew. But his first language, of course, is Arabic. And tonight he'll be speaking in his third language, which is English. So it's quite a remarkable feat. I'm going to start a little bit with Rachel. Our story begins with her. Some of you will have heard this before, but it begins with the telephone call on March 16th, 2003, when we learned she had been killed in the Gaza Strip. Our family has worked continuously for nearly 13 years since that time on Middle East and human rights issues and on pursuing justice and accountability in her case. Rachel was a writer and an artist. She wrote, "Writing is brave. It is maybe the only brave thing about me." We have the gift of her writing in the book Let Me Stand Alone, the journals of Rachel Corrie that were published by Norton in 2008. Rachel is a reader and a thinker, and she was given to making lists. 5 people I wish I'd met who are dead. Salvador Dali, Carl Jung, MLK, JFK, Josephine. 5 people to hang out with in eternity. Rainier M. Rilke, Jesus, E.E. Cummings, Gertrude Stein, Zelda Fitzgerald, 6, Charlie Chaplin. Rachel went to Olympia schools and attended and graduated from Evergreen. In June 2003, her diploma was presented posthumously to Craig and me. From high school on, she volunteered with the Olympia Crisis Clinic, and in college, she worked for Behavioral Health Resources and created a drop-ins program for the mentally ill who struggled to venture into our community. Rachel loved the Pacific Northwest woods, the mountains, and the sea. As a college student, she wrote about where we live in Puget Sound. She said, Perry Creek winds its way out of forest roads and lookouts near Rock Candy. In the winter, the salmon come back purpling and fight upstream. In the summer, the rushes grow so tall you can hide in them and be completely invisible. So many people ask what took Rachel to Gaza. 9/11 was a turning point for her. She worked to understand why it had happened. And as the U.S. turned to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, Rachel turned to this community and to the work that some of you in this room were doing at that time. She organized and worked with others to create a flock of doves for the 2002 Procession of the Species, this community event that honors all of life. And she wrote, I've danced down the street with 40 people from the ages of 7 to 70 dressed as doves. In a lot of ways, I think the procession is a values statement. I'm happy to see a peace message included in that. I think it's important for people who oppose war and repression to speak about who we are as a community, in addition to speaking about war and racism and injustice. We are not outside. I think it's important that human rights and resistance to oppression be included in the way we define ourselves as a community. Rachel connected to local peace groups, and that led her to the issue of Israel-Palestine. She wrote, why do I want to go? I've been organizing in Olympia for a little over a year on anti-war global justice issues, and at some point it started to feel like this work is missing a solid connection to the people who are most immediately impacted by U.S. foreign policy. I've had this underlying need to go to a place and meet people who are on the other end of the portion of my tax money that goes to fund the U.S. and other militaries. In January of 2003, Rachel answered the call from the Palestinian-led International Solidarity Movement for internationals to come to join Palestinians in nonviolent resistance to the occupation, Israeli occupation, and to provide an international voice of support. She flew to Israel, went to the West Bank village of Beit Sahur for training with ISM, and then traveled to Gaza. There are only two stipulations for being a part of the ISM movement, which still exists today. One must believe in freedom and equality for the Palestinian people, and one must commit to using only nonviolent direct action strategies. I think most of you are aware of this, but let me just briefly show you the map. Israel is the dark green, equal to about the size of Maryland. Craig and I drove a lot between Haifa and Tel Aviv. That's about an hour distance, so roughly the distance from Olympia to Seattle. I think looking at those two places gives you some sense about the size. The light green areas on the map are territories where Palestinians have lived under Israeli military occupation. The West Bank, named for its position on the west bank of the Jordan River, with a population of 2,785,000 Palestinians, population total and over 2 million Palestinians. There are 650,000 now Jewish Israeli settlers living in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. Rachel went to Gaza, where there are over 1.8 million people living. It's 4 to 8 miles wide by 25 miles long. Thurston County has almost over 5.5 times the land mass of Gaza, to give you some sense about the size. But we have about only less than 1/7 of the population of Gaza. One thing to keep in mind about what's happening there right now is that nearly 63% of the population of Gaza are under the age of 25. The median age there is 18 years. Here in the US, it's 37.8 years. So it gives you some sense about the youthfulness of that population. When Rachel was there, it was occupied from within. It took 25,000 Israeli soldiers to support the presence of 8,000 settlers who lived where those little dots are on the map in 21 Gaza settlements. And those settlements took up about 40% of the landmass of Gaza. Rachel wrote, "I couldn't even believe that a place like this existed. But even more, can you believe there are children here? Forget the fear. They tell me that at night. Forget the fear. I am ashamed that I am scared for my own body and dying anonymously inside a house in one of the most populous places on earth, where children die as martyrs of the occupation, which we pay for quietly without ever knowing their names. We need more people. I love all of you, Rachel." Rachel went to Rafah, which is at the southern tip of the Gaza Strip on the border with Egypt. And just to refresh your memories, and because I think my daughter speaks better for herself than all of us can do trying to explain who she was, I'd like to share a video. We'd like to share a short video of her 2 days before she was killed. It's a press conference. She was on the top with other activists of Abu Jamil's house, a place or a family that Craig and I have come to know well in Gaza. Let's look at the video.
We are international human rights observers from the United Kingdom, from England, from Scotland, from Italy, and from the United States of America.
Who should I talk at, you or you? My name is Rachel Corrie. I'm from the United States. I'm from Olympia, Washington. That's an enormous question. I've been here for about a month and a half now, and this is definitely the most difficult situation that I've ever seen. In the time that I've been here, children have been shot and killed. On the 30th of January, the Israeli military bulldozed the 2 largest water wells destroying over half of Rafah's water supply. Every few days, if not every day, houses are demolished here. People are economically devastated because of the closure of the borders into Egypt and the extreme control of the Gazan economy by Israel. I came to look at the aftermath of a place where 25 greenhouses had been demolished on the other side of Rafah, destroying the livelihoods of about 300 people. And that had taken place while they rounded up about 150 men, held them under a sniper tower, and shot around them to contain the men, the farmers in the area. So I feel like what I'm witnessing here is a very systematic destruction of people's ability to survive. And that is incredibly horrifying. It's incredibly horrifying. The current Israeli government, I don't have a great deal of faith that they're going to listen to any message from me. I think it has become clear that this government does not care about the safety of its own people and doesn't care at all about the lives of Palestinian people. I think it's ridiculous that my government supports this government and referred to Ariel Sharon as a man of peace. It's clear to me, being here, that Ariel Sharon is invested in perpetuating perpetuating violence. I think calling it a cycle of violence disregards the imbalance of power in this situation, that people's lives here are almost completely controlled by the Israeli government. And it's amazing that people are able to hold on to their humanity as much as they have. Sometimes it takes a while for it to set in what is happening here, because I think many of the people here, they try to maintain what they can of their lives, and I don't know, maybe it has to do with protecting their children, that they try to be happy, joke with their children. So sometimes it takes time to it's hard to hold in your mind, the complete reality of what's happening here. Sometimes I'm sitting down to dinner with people and I just realize that that there is a massive military machine surrounding them and trying to kill these people that I'm having dinner with, these families that I'm sitting down to eat with, and who are being very generous and kind to me, and their children here who are incredibly threatened, living lives that no child ever should have to live. And so I feel a lot of horror, really. I feel a lot of horror about the situation.
To be neighborhoods, and that whole entire neighborhoods were being demolished wholesale during that time. You see the row of houses behind her. There was a steel wall being built, not this, and remember, this is the border with Egypt, Rafah and Egypt. It's also not on the corridor, the Philadelphia corridor that Israel did have access to. It extends that area. That wall has come down now. And also you saw the machines in the video, which were Caterpillar D9R bulldozers. Craig and I often point out that it was our tax dollars that supplied that equipment. And that's the kind of machine that was used when Rachel was killed. Rachel was with the other activists. You saw Alice in the video at the beginning. They came from all over the world, Sweden, Italy, Japan. They slept at water wells that also were threatened with demolition. Some were destroyed and damaged. They stood in front of threatened homes. One was the Nasrallah family home. And Rachel and other ISMers built relationships with these families who lived along this border where they were so threatened. She wrote about the Nasrallah family. She said, after I wrote to you, I went incommunicado from the affinity group for about 10 hours, which I spent with a family on the front line in Hai Salam who fixed me dinner and have cable TV. The 2 front rooms of their house are unusable because gunshots have been fired through the walls, so the whole family, 3 kids and 2 parents, sleep in the parents' bedroom. I sleep on the floor next to the youngest daughter, Iman, and we all share blankets. There were 2 brothers in the family, a pharmacist and an accountant, their wives and their 5 young children, and they lived in 2 stories of the house. In 2005, after Rachel was killed, part of that family came here to Olympia, visited us, traveled with Craig and me for a month so that they could tell their own story. Neither the Israeli nor the United States government had anything against this family. They had to be able to travel to Tel Aviv to get their visas to come here and then get approval from the US government to come. And yet their house was eventually destroyed without any compensation. Human Rights Watch reported that between September 2000 and 2004, the Israeli military destroyed homes of more than 10% of Rafah's population, over 16,000 people, and that the pattern of destruction strongly suggests, this is a quote from Human Rights Watch, that Israeli forces demolish homes wholesale, regardless of whether they posed a specific threat in violation of international law. In most of the cases, Human Rights Watch found that destruction was carried out in the absence of military necessity. On March 16, 2003, Rachel was with 7 other international activists from the US and the UK. They worked the full afternoon challenging operators of 2 US-funded Caterpillar D9 bulldozers and an armored personnel carrier that were operating in the Hai Salam area of Rafah, clearing land, pushing against structures, and threatening homes. There were 2 IDF soldiers, a driver, and a commander who was to be a second set of eyes in each of the Caterpillar bulldozers. The company commander in the APC vehicle had requested that the operation cease, but his commanders in the rear ordered the work to continue and not to let the activists interfere. At about 5 p.m., in a run toward Rachel and the Nasrallah home, one of the Caterpillar D9 bulldozers did not stop, as they had done when they approached the activist earlier in the day. The driver continued ahead over Rachel, paused, and then backing, went over her again. The members of the family, the Nasrallah family who were in the home, watched from their garden. They had all come down into the garden area because they were very concerned about what would happen, so they watched through a crack in the garden wall. And Rachel died a short time after. For over 12 years, our family has continued to work for accountability for Rachel's killing with the US and Israeli governments and in Israeli courts. I'm going to turn it over to Craig for a few minutes before we turn it over to Hussein to talk about that journey.
So I want to try to put some context around what Hussein's going to talk about. So I usually do this from about 20,000 foot level of talking in generalities. I'm going to go up to about 40,000 foot to give Hussein a little bit more time here. So when something like this happens, you want some accountability. Both Rachel deserves accountability, and I think with a lot of other families that we now know, sadly, that have actually lost loved ones on either side of the Green Line, either in Israel or certainly in West Bank and Gaza, you also don't want it to happen again. So the ways that we were looking for accountability, we were looking for it first through Israeli military justice, then diplomacy, then the US-led investigation, and finally the civil lawsuit that we're really going to spend time on tonight. So as far as Israeli military justice was concerned, the President of the United States was promised a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation into Rachel's killing by Prime Minister Sharon the day after she was killed. But in May 23rd of that year, they closed the military investigation, and they declined to give any report to the U.S. government. The next year, Larry Wilkerson, who was Colin Powell's chief of staff, in a letter to our family said that in his opinion, it was not a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation. And that opinion is still the opinion of the U.S. government. So that's by 4 different secretaries of state and 2 different presidential administrations. And our U.S. government continues to ask for a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation into Rachel's killing. So much for the military police investigation. When we came to trial, one of the things that I think was really notable is that we heard testimony from the chief of the investigators, the Israeli military investigators, and he said that in his opinion, Israel was at war with everyone in the Gaza Strip, including Rachel and the activists there. So as far as he was concerned, she was, I think they would have used, but I don't know that he did in that sentence, a terrorist. But that's who they gave the investigation over to. So we asked for diplomacy. Then we tried to get the State Department to work through it, and in fact, they did continue to ask their counterparts. So we had one particular piece of information that says, starting, of course, from the President of the United States, but also the Secretary of State, various ambassadors to Israel, and also various undersecretaries of state had all asked their counterpart or written to people in Israel asking for a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation. But we heard this from Michelle Ben-Yaitov, who was the acting director of citizen services for the State Department, so a high-level State Department official. She said, "We have consistently requested that the government of Israel conduct a full and transparent investigation into Rachel's death. Our requests have gone unanswered or ignored." So that's from the State Department in writing, and it's echoing a response that comes from a government that we're now giving over $3.5 billion a year to, but they won't answer the letters. So much for diplomacy. We also asked, we wanted a U.S.-led investigation. So some of you maybe remember Congressman Brian Baird. Here was our congressman, Rachel's congressman at the time. He introduced House Concurrent Resolution 111 in 2003, asking for a U.S.-led investigation into Rachel's killing. In March 17th of 2005, we finally had, Sarah and I had a meeting with Barry Sabin in the Department of Justice. So that's one day after, so 2 years and 1 day after Rachel was killing, we finally got into the Justice Department to ask for such an investigation. And so we put that forward. We were in contact with the Justice Department. And we had been in contact before that. I'm just trying to kind of go quickly here. Before that, we were in contact with the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington here, and Sarah mostly was doing the contacts back and forth. But through them and through some members of Congress, we finally got a meeting in the Justice Department and asked for this investigation. I will say that when we first met with the U.S. Attorney, he said that I've got as much time for you as you need, but I'm here to tell you there will never be a U.S.-led investigation into your daughter's killing. To make it a crime to kill a U.S. citizen overseas, it actually has to be an act of terrorism. And that makes sense, because we don't want Russia's laws to apply in the United States, and so our laws don't apply in Russia or other places. But he said, so what it takes to qualify under that is it takes the signature of the the Attorney General that says that in his or her opinion, the killing was part of an act to coerce, intimidate, or retaliate against a foreign government or civilian population. And he went on to say, no Attorney General, past, present, or future, will ever so signify for the state of Israel, in the case of the state of Israel. And I think he was trying to be helpful, truthful. But
I just thought you could mention who that is. That was the attorney for Western Washington, U.S. Attorney for Western Washington, John McCain. He later went to Palestine and spent 2 years there on a U.S. project developing, I think, legal systems. He's just recently written an op-ed that appeared in the Seattle Times in which he describes the situation in the West Bank and shows support for some of the things that we're working on, like BDS and so forth. So I thought it was good to point out.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. But moving right along.
Yeah.
So on May 5th of 2006, the Department of Justice refused to open an investigation. And when Sarah asked how high a level was the decision made at, was it the Attorney General? There was answer with a smile, and I knew you were going to ask that question, and I won't give you the answer. They also said that part of their reasoning had to do with policy. So that law has been used against the government of Indonesia, but it wasn't used in Rachel's case. So there's no U.S. investigation either. So what happens is the only procedure that we as a family have that we can pursue forward and drive is a civil lawsuit. We can bring that through Hussein, and then we have the means to pull that forward, and it doesn't matter if the government bails on us. So we filed that lawsuit, I think as Cindy said, a day before the statute of limitations ran out in it says 2003, it was filed in 2005. The first day of trial was March 10th of 2010. The last day of trial was July 10th, 2011. Like Cindy said, it gets drawn out. For actually 15 days of testimony, 23 witnesses, and over 2,000 pages of testimony when it's translated into English. The verdict came out on August 28th, 2012. Now, what we have in the lawsuit is basically illegal killing or a loss of lives thing. So we're saying that Rachel's right to life and her human rights, which were anchored in international humanitarian law and the international human rights law and basic law, human dignity and liberty, that she was deprived of that. And we also said that her killing was either intentional or due to gross negligence. So they could have actually lost this lawsuit without any insurance. I was just saying we've got Hussein here with us, but that's all of us gathered together at the lower court, at the district court in Haifa, going in there. So the verdict that came out of the lower court, the lower court said it was an act of war and that the state cannot be held responsible for acts in wartime. They said that Rachel was in a closed military zone and was responsible for her own death. So that judge basically blamed Rachel for her own death. One thing I will say about both of those statements, from my understanding, of course, and as a soldier, I was in Vietnam, you are responsible for what you do in a war zone, and you should take that responsibility seriously. The other thing is that Hussein continued to ask for some sort of written documentation that it is a closed military zone, and the government never supplied that documentation. And in fact, the highest ranking Israeli military official that was actually out there at the time, a captain that was in the armored personnel carrier, when Hussein asked him under oath, did he think it was a closed military zone? He said he did not think so, and he didn't believe that he had the rank or the authority to make it a closed military zone. So if the own Israeli officials don't know if it's a closed military zone, I don't know how Rachel would. And of course, just because it's a closed military zone, you don't have the right to run over people with a bulldozer or shoot them or other things. Richard Silverstein up in Seattle wrote a really good article about this, and you can find that out on our website. The lower court verdict was condemned by Jimmy Carter at the Carter Center for one. A couple of other groups, Richard Falk with the UN condemned it, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International also condemned it after a Supreme Court verdict, because of course that's what we did. Without actually consulting with us, I think the first time I heard we were going to appeal was when Hussein said we were going to appeal this at a press conference. You were so angry when you came out that you said that, and we were all angry too, so it wasn't like it needed discussing. But anyway, we did appeal it. Hussein appealed it on our behalf, and the oral arguments were May of last year, and then the decision came down February of this year. And it affirmed the district court opinion, and it said remarkably that Israeli law supersedes international law. So I'm going to kind of leave it there, but what I would say and how I characterize this is that when we went to court, I'm not sure if the first time we thought about going to Israeli court on this, we were told by some Americans that we would have a chance in prevailing in court, but I think by the time we actually filed the certainly in the first day that we were in court, we realized that we weren't going to get a finding in our favor. But what Hussein was able to do was put the whole court system on trial, it seems to me, and bring it out to the public, just what sort of support and what a part of the occupation, integral part of the occupation, the Israeli courts are. And we always worked with Hussein and another attorney, Jamil Dakwar. We always work with the public and trying to get information out. So the day that the lower court finding came out, I do remember that Cindy, I think it was about 2 days later, a day later, that we were trying to talk to you guys back here. But that same day, we were outside of a hotel on the streets. I was facing one way, talking to CNN, while Cindy had her back to me, facing the other way, talking to BBC. We got a lot of publicity out, and I think that's helpful, but of course it only lasts for a short time. So turn it over to you, Hussein.
Good evening to all, and thank you for coming. First of all, I would apologize for my English if you will not understand something of what I'm going to say. I will speak to you about two main issues. The first, the case of Rachel, and I will give you some idea about the running a last wave of hostility and what is happening on the ground in our area. First of all, this is my opportunity to thank this generous family for giving me this remarkable case to defend. Every one of us in his business, in his work, has some events that build him, events that signs some symbolism for him, for his life, for his future, for his career. To be objective with you, it was my building case that built my clear opinion about the real occupation. Lawyers could be mainly in two big groups. One, daily lawyers who deal with cases as lawyers who looking just for earning money, and cause lawyer. A cause lawyer in area of conflict looks how to bring the case, how to maximize it, and how to get the benefit, not the nearer benefit, but the faraway benefit. And my chance was that I found here a generous family who is ready to be a cause plaintiff. When I come back in my memory to 2005, when they called me with my colleague Jamil Dakwar and told me that they think to bring a suitcase in the Israeli courts, I thought a little bit, what brings this American family to seek here in this injustice area? They are living here calmly in the United States, and this event fall on their heads as catastrophe. But so far I discovered that they are the cause plaintiff that I could run a long way with them. When I began with the case, we knew from the beginning, me and the family, Sarah, Cindy, and Craig, that we are in front of an uphill battle. And we all together agreed that even if we succeed, okay, it's okay, we win. And even if we don't succeed in the civil case, we also will win throughout the exploration of the case, the expose, the attempt to discover what happened on that day of the 16th of March 2003 when Rachel was killed. It is maybe difficult to explain to you why bringing such a case in the Israeli courts for an event which happened in Philadelphia Road, nearby Egypt, why it should be brought apparently in front of Israeli court and to be dealt according to the Israeli law, internal law. According to basic rules of international private law, it should be dealt according to the Egyptian law, which is applicable to Gaza Strip. But due to the fact that Rachel was killed by an Israeli soldier who was driving this American bulldozer of the American industry, we thought that we should bring the case in front of the civil court of Haifa and to be dealt according to the Israeli internal law, because it is impossible to sue the Israeli entity in front of the Palestinian courts in Gaza. Okay, from the beginning we sought for accountability. Accountability means that we should know who was responsible for the killing of Rachel. In democratic states in which there are systems of checks and balances, there should be some review of all what happened there. But directly after the killing of Rachel, the army had some internal investigation which is not published and which it is secret. According to this procedure, all the people who are involved are sitting together and discussing what happens. Any layman understands that when we have such a discussion, every one of us knows what he is going to do in the investigation. What the big boss, what the big brother would like us to think, what the big brother wants us to say about the circumstances of the killing of Rachel. Directly after that, there began an investigation. And the operator, while he was investigated, the commander entered to the room and ordered him to silence until he has a speech with him. In other words, it means that he tried to affect this person and to guide him and direct him how to testify in front of the special unit of the army. The army itself is the unit who investigate in the circumstances of the killing. How could he be objective in such a circumstances? Okay, after having this investigation, they decided that there is no one who is responsible for the killing, because no one can testify that the operator had seen Rachel before the killing. Although we know that she was with shining jacket for a period of 5 hours with slogan and with microphone in her hand, shouting to the army to stop the destruction of the houses of the people, of the Palestinians in Rafah. How could the driver could not see her? Even a child of 2 years could not be persuaded by this tale. Okay, they decided in the end of the day, after this investigation, to close the file. The family had been informed in the beginning, while Sharon was in the United States in a meeting on that day, that thorough and independent and transparent investigation will be held by the army. The final decision was to close the file. Then the family sought how we could know more details about what happened there. It is right that they have had a copy of the investigation unit, but most of it was erased, without names, without knowing the levels of the commanders who were there, and it was written in a very bad handwriting. They paid a lot of money in order to get the broken Hebrew, which was written there, and then to translate it to English. On March 2003, they decided to think about a case. According to some law that the Israeli enacted, they were able to bring the case only 2 years after the killing because of a principle which called a passage of time. Then we ran and began, and we filed the case on the 15th of May 2003. Since 2003 until August 2010, the case was heard in the District Court of Haifa. Throughout, the military, the Minister of Defense issued a certificate of secrecy, according to which it is forbidden to disclose some of the materials that they have gathered in this file. We petitioned to the Supreme Court to reveal some of the materials. And one of the materials that we wanted to reveal is the manual of this bulldozer. And we found that according to the civil manual, as well according to the armistice manual, it is forbidden for the operator to work with the bulldozer while there are people around the bulldozer in length of 20 meters. So, according to these two manuals, it was forbidden to work with this bulldozer. But we brought evidences through the cross-examination that we have had in court that Rachel was most of the time nearby the bulldozer by 2 meters and by 1 meter. And they were obliged, according to this rule, to stop the operation. Now, after all this hearing, and throughout the hearing of the commander of the area, Pinky Zuaritz, who came to court, and he declared that according to the engagement rules dealing with reference to civilians who are around, it was agreed that any civilian should not be there, and the orders were shoot to kill any civilian who will be present in the area. Such a declaration is contradicting the international law. Such a declaration, such rules is illegal. A black flag is upon it. And any soldier knows that when he receives illegal order, he should not obey to it, because it is contrary to law, it is contrary to justice, it is contrary to basic rights of human rights. Anyway, we persuaded and we got the most materials that we could have in court. And I think that the family had the chance to hear from first hand, although all the witnesses were witnessing behind the screen. Why? They are afraid from the family of Rachel. Imagine that these two people are maybe hostile and they could revenge. They were afraid, as you hear, and they were not coming to the court through the corridor. They were entering to the court through the courtroom of the judge, in order not to give the family the opportunity to see them, or for the journalists to take pictures for them. Why they afraid? You know, because they are responsible for the killing. They are responsible for the killing, and they are afraid to be known that they are the killers. They are the assassinators. We appealed the case to the Supreme Court. The judge in the magistrate court decided that it was an act of war, because Rachel was in an area which was closed according to some military order. We asked to present such an order. The state looked for such an order, didn't find. But the judge decided that he was persuaded that it was the order. Rachel entered to Gaza through the checkpoint, and she came not by parachute to Gaza. She came through the airport of Lida. And then she entered to Gaza through the checkpoint in Erez. And throughout the time that she was there, she was in touch with the American embassy all the time, as well, all the ISM people. The ISM people came to Gaza to protest against the demolition of the houses of the people in Gaza. But throughout the 5 hours, nothing happened except the demonstration and the slogans that they have had at that time. What kind of war was there? What kind of war they declared? If we are speaking about proportionality, the weight of Gaza of Rachel was 55 kilos, and the weight of the bulldozer was 65 tons, and she was crushed by this bulldozer. So even if you want to speak about war activity, you should say, look, some hostile people, some people were with guns, some people opened fire against the army, but all the people who were around were in these heavy cars and vehicles of the army, and no one was able to drop down and even to do pee-pee. All the 5 hours. And then they came to court and persuaded the judge, and later persuaded the Supreme Court, which has very high reputation among here in the States, that it is a reliable court, that it was an act of war. It was some attempt to harm our intelligence by saying that Rachel brought her death by her hands by being there in Gaza Strip. When Rachel came to Gaza, she preferred not to be in sorry to say, this worthy life here in the United States. She came there because she believed that she could contribute something to oppose this injustice, ongoing injustice against the Palestinian people. And I think that we could learn from her heritage that all of us could do something for helping people, regardless who are, and where they are, to rebel against injustice and against hatred and against war life. The second issue that I would like to refer to is the current situation now. But since Rachel was killed in 2003, thousands of Palestinians were killed and thousands others were injured, thousands others were in jail, thousands others lost their properties, their poor homes were destroyed. Some others were evicted from their houses in Jerusalem and in other places to be replaced by settlers. Now there is a new wave of hostility in the area. I prepared for you some PowerPoint. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. In October 2000, 15 Palestinian Israelis, 13, among them 12 Israeli citizens were killed in the events of October. No one of the people, of the policemen who were responsible for the killing was held accountable for the killing. No one indictment was issued to court. Although the autopsy that had been carried or operated to some of them showed obviously that they were killed by live ammunition. Yeah, next, please, next. Okay, these are the picture. Most of the people are young people who went out to demonstrate to demonstrate against the occupation when the second Intifada broke out. Next, please. Since that time, every year, the Palestinians inside Israel have the anniversary of the event of October 2000, and the state consisted some committee to search about the circumstances of the killing of the Palestinians, but the general attorney, who is now playing the role as a judge in the Supreme Court, decided to close all the files. In the last wave of what is happening in the country, there is a wave of arrests and of hostility against, brutality against demonstrators, and even there are punitive arrests through the media or through what's so-called the Facebook, and people who want to express some solidarity, they come all night and detain them. Next, please. Yeah, this lady, 17 years old, she was detained just for trying to organize transportation to the demonstration with permission, which was supposed to be in Nazareth. Her father was detained as well, and later he was released. Next, please. Yeah, this is the source through which they begin to search about demonstrators through the Facebook and through the social media. Yeah, this is a symbol of what is happening in Israel about dual reference. Here you see that two ministers in the government of Netanyahu are calling for racist and hostile hostility against Arabs. Lieberman says that we must raise the axe and cut off their heads. And the Attorney General decides to close the file. And in the meantime, a young person from the Galilee, 19 years old, because of writing a spot in his Facebook, long life to Intifada, he is detained and indicted for incitement and sent for jail until the end of the legal procedures. Yeah, extrajudicial killing. Policing is a profession, and according to the rules of opening fire, it is forbidden to open a fire against civilian unless he endangered the life of others. But in the last events, it was decided that the army and the policemen, as well civilians, could open fire when they feel that they are in risk. This change made the situation brought it to some way of anarchism. Just one fact, 80 Palestinians were killed. Among them, 19 are minors, and 4 ladies, 4 women, and thousands of injured people. In the meantime, 11 Israelis were killed. 2 of them were killed by Israelis who thought that they are killing Palestinians just for their color. It is due to this policy of opening fire and calling for the people to carry weapons and not to hesitate to use them when they feel that they are in risk situation. Yeah, this young person, Fadi Aloun from Jerusalem, he stabbed a Jewish, and then he was bleeding on land, and people were around him. When the police arrived to the scene, he was opening fire to him and killing him, and the state refused to manage autopsy for his body, and later the state kept his body for about 1 month and gave it to his family after some petitions. East Jerusalem. In East Jerusalem, there are about 300,000 Palestinians who are living in 13 neighborhoods in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was, the land space of Jerusalem was enlarged due to the Israeli policy to apply the Israeli law on Jerusalem. In '68, Jerusalem was annexed to Israel. The landscape of Jerusalem was just 6 kilometers. Now it is 360 square kilometers, and it is parallel to the landscape of Gaza, in which 1.8 million people are living. In the last events, Netanyahu does not know how to manage with Jerusalem, and he gave order to step some checkpoints in the Palestinian neighborhood. pupils who go to school, which are located about 1 kilometer from their homes. In some situations, they are passing this way by 3 hours and 4 hours a day. In Jerusalem, again, evictions of homes in order to settle settlers, and destruction of homes for what's so-called collective punishment. Only recently, 2 days ago, the Supreme Court confirmed this policy, saying that it doesn't contrast the international law. Yeah, these are pictures. Yeah, throwers of stones. I don't know about, I wonder if you know about people who were under occupation, who were welcoming their occupier with flowers. I don't know about such a people, but Palestinian people tried all means of civil protest since the beginning of the occupation in '67. And thousands of people were killed, thousands of people were injured, thousands of people were living in jails. You cannot find even a Palestinian who is over 25 years who had not been jailed once in life in the occupied territories. And the throwing stones to occupiers, I think it is a basic duty. So the Israelis decided that they should amend the law about stone throwers. There, according to the law, there is age of legal responsibility, which it is 12. It is crossing nations. Now, they have to deal with minors who are under 12. They cannot bring them to justice. Then they decided that they should apply responsibility on their parents for neglecting the education of their children, although they were not neglected. I think they were not neglecting them. I think that they were educating them that they should oppose the occupation and they were doing right. But the Israelis tried to criminalize the parents for the doing of these new minors. And the second change in the law was to decide about minimum penalty of 4 years imprisonment of minors who are convicted in throwing stones. This change is contrary to basic international values of referring to children who are involved in criminal activity. But this is the change in Israel, and they think that every time that they cannot deal with the political issue, they go to the box of instruments and take a new instrument, new law. How to deal with this? More punishment. How to do it? With curfew. How to do it? With administrative detention. Administrative detention, it is administrative. It is without legal process, without due process, without indictment, and without court, as usual. Yeah. Okay. Inside the green line. Me, myself, I am living inside the green line, and we are in Adala, NGO body, treats or deals with breach of human rights inside the green line. As well, we adopt cases of Palestinians in the occupied territories. inside the Green Line, there we live 1.6 million Palestinians, and we are discriminated, disqualified by the Israelis in all topics: budgets, housing, education, access to justice, access to social welfare, as well for transportation. Everywhere that you have the possibility to focus, you can find this injustice. And in Israel, there is no constitution. There are only two basic rules, basic laws. We try to challenge the Supreme Court by petitions against this policy of discrimination. Sometimes we succeed in individual cases, but in the big cases that have implication on the mass, we fail. But even when we fail, we win because we explore it, we expose it, and we use it for our international advocacy. I think that something is happening in the area. And when Netanyahu decides that he wants to free Germany from responsibility for the Holocaust and to impose it on the shoulders of the Palestinians, you know that he is in trouble. But this is the situation right now, and we hope that with the help of friends over the world, we could change reality, even through the symbol of that sacrifice of Rachel, who sacrificed her life for the values that he believed in. Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. We have time for questions. I hope that there are some. Somebody, is Andrew here? Andrew, do you want to come and carry a mic in case there are questions so everybody could hear and we could hear? If you could carry it back and forth, that would be great. Thanks.
Somebody always has to go first.
Well, I'll do a comment. I've got a comment more than a question, but maybe one or more of you want to talk about it. And that is the extraordinary irony that the judge isn't holding people responsible for their actions, even during war, when that came into jurisprudence and all, at least most recently through Nuremberg, and that Nuremberg was the attempt after the Holocaust to bring in some, crimes against peace and rules of war. So it's just bizarre to me, the irony that the Israeli state is thumbing its nose at Nuremberg. So I don't know if you want to say anything, but that's just so sad. And
for those of you who don't know, this is Sally Shaw, our friend from Tacoma with Jewish Voice for Peace. And I think, a little bit contrary to what Hussein said, I did, just because I am an optimist pretty much. And I hoped for something from the court, just some small acknowledgement that maybe something wrong happened the day Rachel was killed. And there was nothing. And Craig remembers it as our translators who were sitting next to us, that they actually stopped because the verdict was so awful that they were having, these are our Jewish Israeli translators, because it was so awful. It became clear very quickly in the words that the judge was sharing. In some ways, it makes it much easier for us because there was nothing subtle about it at all. I mean, it's just a really disturbing verdict. And it's having implications. I mean, Hussein could talk about how they're using the Supreme Court, of course, like in all courts, they use what the Supreme Court has said to apply to other cases coming up now. One thing, though, I would share with you is, this relates to investigations, but I think it applies to the courts in a way as well. The human rights organization B'Tselem in Israel, and also Yesh Din, after Gaza last year, they refused to share their data. They work in the occupied territories gathering data about what's happening. They're Israeli organizations, but they gather data about what's happening in the occupied territories. They refused to to share it with the government, with the military, because everything that they had done in the past, they said, had been so misused. So it's just a really, I mean, I remember watching a film when I really got very emotional about Sami al-Aryan in Florida. When I realized, some of you know about that case, and I don't know the case well, but I just realized watching the film about it that I saw at Evergreen, that the courts that I experienced here in Thurston County were probably different from what they were facing there in that part of Florida. And so I think it's interesting to think about how the reality, and it's kind of like when you're sick, medicine sounds great until you get sick and then you have to deal with it and it's not so great. I think maybe the courts are the same way. Maybe you each have.
I studied to know that in the Second World War, here in the United States, they had arrested the Japanese who were there while their children were in the American army in the battle, okay? And the Supreme Court here in the United States affirmed that most of the detention of the Japanese who were detained at that time. You cannot suppose from courts to be liberal more than the politician. Courts usually one machine of the system, and it is bad because it gives the stamp. And courts usually goes after the politician, especially in areas of crisis. In areas of crisis, you cannot suppose from conservative judges to go against the system. Because if they are going against the system, they are breaking the land that they are standing upon. They are standing behind the expression of interpreting the law. But when I went to school of law, to the faculty of law, I have had a lecturer who had been studied in Britain. And he said, look, there are two rules of administrative law. A says that the king does no wrong. And B, if he does, look to A. Yeah. So when we go to court, we try to play according to the rules of the law, but not exactly. because we try to make the policy to gain from the legal process. And what happened in this case, that when all the whole was by supporters of the family of Rachel, Israelis, Palestinians, as well Jewish leftist people who came to the court, and after 2 sessions, the state felt that they are in some situation that they are minority, okay? Although the judge say have some sympathy to them, and then they mobilize some people to come to chair, yeah, to support them, but for 1 or 2 sessions, and then they left. And all along the case, there were journalists, there were Palestinian activists, Israeli activists who came to the court. And through them, we can influence the environment. But it is not that environment that we can do the big change. But at least we are doing our duty.
I guess I'd just add, I thought of it, Sally, and it is disturbing. I think if we kind of bring this home, because there are a lot of negative things I think that we all know about the occupation that actually comes to the United States, impacts our government, not just when Netanyahu is speaking in Congress, but in other ways, laws that try to make BDS illegal or at least very difficult, lawsuits. Using the courts to shut down the voice of our community here in the case that was brought against the co-op. It's just another case of all this. But as a family, and certainly with mentors like Hussein, I think we've tried to base what we do in our understanding of opposing the occupation in international law and human rights law, and see it as a case of human rights, but through international law. Now, I've used that as sort of an explanation and been kind of proud of that. But if you go, for instance, and talk to Black Lives Matter people here in the United States, that's not particularly a good claim, because the courts have treated many of those people, as Hussein is talking about Palestinians, you know. So their experience with the court system is very different from this, you know, white grandson of a lawyer and nephew of several lawyers, and I guess the father-in-law of a lawyer. It's a whole different experience for us than others. And early on, I was trying to talk about the law, but of course the law gets, laws get passed. And so I kind of gave up on that in a little while, and I would talk, my mother didn't like this, but I would talk about mom's rules, my mother's rules. And I don't think she really liked me talking about that, but most people have a mother that teaches them right and wrong and whatever. And what I was actually thinking about, and it applies a little bit to the land that's taken from Palestinians, is that I remember when I was maybe 7 years old, and I went down to the corner drugstore, and I came back and said, some kid forgot his bicycle down there, you know, and so I think I'll go down and get the bicycle. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, nobody knows who it belongs to, you know, who it belongs to. And she said, you know it's not yours. And, you know, if you get in, for instance, the laws in the West Bank, and they'll talk about, well, there wasn't filed here, or wasn't filed there, or whatever. But, you know, mom's rules would be, well, you know, it's not yours. But anyway, it is, I guess I agree with you, it's disconcerting that particularly it would come from Israel and to overturn that Nuremberg trials.
What was the kind, was there, and what was the kind of exposure or media attention or anything that was it you were able to do over there during the drawn-out, long extended supporters in the courtroom? Anything like that?
Like I said, there was that right after the verdict. You know, there was really a lot of that day. There was a lot of attention, and it continued throughout the next few weeks. And that's different than a lot of attention that we have. For instance, CNN once did an interview with Cindy and Khalid Nasrallah when they were in Chicago. Now that was a tour in the United States, and it was about something that happened to a U.S. citizen, an interview with a U.S. international TV, whatever you want to call it, and it was only shown overseas. But the day that the verdict came out, I think that they had done something prior to that, because they had what's called B-roll from kids playing soccer in Rafah, and they had gone to Rafah and taken some stuff there, and my sister said that showed. But then that time I talked about where I was talking on CNN in the middle of the afternoon, and Cindy was on BBC, and then we were back at night, about 10 o'clock, out on the roof. And in that interview, I was, of course, not able to see anything, and I went on first. But by the end of the day, Israel had their top spokesperson, who is...
I'm forgetting.
Okay, so she usually knows, and for me, it's not Alzheimer's, as I like to say, it's only sometimers. But anyhow, Israel had their top spokesperson on. He followed me, and they kept it open long enough for I could listen for another 5 minutes, and hear. And at the end of the interview, he was saying that, well, the eyewitnesses, he's talking entirely about the soldier eyewitnesses whose testimony in court was incomprehensible. It was just really bad. But anyway, so the eyewitnesses all said this, this, and this. And going back to the United States, the end statement from the interviewer was, well, there's one eyewitness we cannot ask. And this guy said, who's that? He said, Rachel Corrie. And click, it was off. That's a huge difference from CNN. So I think Sarah wants to talk too about this.
Hi. I just want everyone here in Olympia to really understand what a community it was for us actually when we did get to Haifa, and how much work and effort went into this process of the trial, not just from Hussein and our attorneys, but from the translators, from the activist community in Israel, which may be a small group of people, but very, very dedicated people. When we talk about having translators, we call them whisper translators. So picture sitting in the courtroom on benches and having to have someone whisper. Our family wants to be involved in everything, so we want to hear every word that's being said. So I have someone whispering in my ear. I have it set up so Mom has someone whispering in hers, Dad in his. Then we also went out and had to find translators for some of the press. So occasionally some of these activist volunteers were translating for the New York Times, for the AP, for anybody that couldn't get a translator that day that was coming, that was English-speaking press that was there. They were helping to do that. That meant oftentimes we would go out and just put a call out the night before court and say, look, we need 6 to 8 people to take a day off work and show up and come translate for us. Can you do it? And we always had people there ready to help us. Court would oftentimes be canceled at the last second. We might get word the night before, we might get word that morning. There was maybe an ice cream party that had to happen, and court couldn't happen. Things like this came up all the time. It's just the process of the court. And so we'd have to switch around all of these translators, some that came from Tel Aviv, some that came from Jerusalem, some that were in Haifa, to help us. Other people were just people that followed the court case, that lived in Nazareth, that would come down every time there was a hearing and sit through hours of court testimony just to be there in the room. Trying to just get media to come, in terms of the Israeli press, it was covered in all of the major Israeli newspapers, which was huge, because if you're a Palestinian case in the Israeli courtroom, it is not covered. You don't see that kind of coverage. The human rights organizations, international as well as Israeli, and there are human rights organizations in the West Bank that would send observers to the courtroom. Usually they would be people they'd work with, internationals that could actually travel into Israel, because if you're a Palestinian in the West Bank, you don't have the opportunity to travel to Haifa to go to the court. But all of these organizations would send people to monitor our court case. That's something also that doesn't happen for Palestinians in the courtroom, and it's something that's very much needed. People do try to go, and all of the, a lot of the U.S. organizations will encourage anytime people are traveling to Israel to go sit in a courtroom. See what that process is like. Go, if you can get into a courtroom, go sit and try to just experience it, because it was a shock to us as an American family being there. But it was this huge community that for us was built around this case. So in some ways, it was this very hard process that we had to go through, but there are parts of it I'm extremely grateful for. And I'm grateful that we had the opportunity to go to Israel and see through this very, very hard situation how community can come together to support a family. And it was Palestinians, it was Jewish Israelis, it was internationals all coming together through this process. So it's not something I can always convey to Olympia. I always say, for me, Hussein was the person that makes me stronger. And when I would walk into that courtroom, I was coming off of being up all night trying to organize translators and press releases and getting people there. And I'd come in this whole knot of energy and show up to the courtroom, and you just see this presence and this calm from Hussein. And I think it all would just wash over us, and we just trusted him with every bit of our being. And still do. I saw Hussein get off the airplane, and my father went and found the gate he was coming in up. And still, I had this feeling of seeing him across the hall and having that wave of everything's okay every time I see him. So there are a lot of positives in this process, and it's just wanting to convey that to my community here as well.
I assume the international solidarity movement was involved in this. Could you talk a little bit about the role they played in the case?
We brought 4 of the 7 eyewitnesses to Israel to testify. And I've said that the court system there is different than here. And the first testimony in a civil case, I don't know if it's true in a criminal case, but in a civil case is an affidavit that the witnesses write with the support of their attorneys. And then so you really start with cross-examination of witnesses, what they've written in their affidavits. And there's kind of a strategic thing that goes into that, because Hussein, when he brought the case, determined that the witnesses we would bring would be the 4 internationals, and there were a couple of others, but not all of the military that showed up. The state actually brought those people, and he had a good idea that that's what would happen, that that's what they would do. But by doing that, the defendants in this case, the state, we were bringing the case, the state got to interview our eyewitnesses for the bulk of the time, and then Hussein was able to cross-examine, follow up with a cross-examination. But with all the military witnesses, then Hussein got to do the bulk of the questioning, which was very important in terms of what we were able to ask and what got out. But our 4 international eyewitnesses who came, 2 came, there were 3 from the UK and 1 from the US. And they had long, grueling sessions. One thing I'd say about it is that the first day that we were in court, the translator was totally inadequate for the whole first day. And in fact, again, those Jewish Israelis who were sitting next to us, they were like shouting out almost when they heard the mistranslations in the court. Hussein tried to get that even tried to get that removed, but the judge said no. And he said he understood there was a bad translator, so the next day there was a new one. But it was an interesting process. And of course, for our witnesses, they would say something in English, then it had to be translated into Hebrew. The questions had to be translated to them and so forth. So it was a long, grueling process. They were great. One of those people, I'll say, Alice, I just had an email from her. Craig and I know all of them. Alice is coming to the US from the UK, and she was the person you saw at the beginning of that video with Rachel. She'll be here. She wants to come, and she wants very much to connect with people in the community. So we're really excited. It's always really nice to reconnect with them.
Just on the translation side of it, that first day in court, really, for me, with the translation problems, is when it hit me what we were up against. When you said it was a bad translation, it was entirely inadequate, and an example of that would be one of our witnesses said that the bulldozer went over Rachel with the blade in the earth, and it was translated as him saying the blade was in the air. So that is as bad as the translation was. Our attorneys said, we need to stop court. This is injustice is happening here. We need to stop court until a better translator can be found. And that is when the judge said, we agree it's bad, but we'll just go on with it. In my mind, that is when it snapped. That really what the judge was saying there is, it didn't matter what our witnesses were saying. And so that was day one of the court process. And from that point in my mind, we as a family had to do everything we could from that day forward to bring forward what we were seeing, not only from the system, but from the courtroom, from all of this, in any way we could. And I think at that point, we thought we were going into a month-long a court case. We didn't realize that I would spend off and on the next year of my life living in Haifa. But at that point, there was no going back. You knew what you were facing, and every ounce of your energy and your family's energy had to go into it. So that's, you know, I say this because one of the steps I later did when we were going through the decision, there's a process in the court where before the judge's decision comes out, the final statements are actually done in writing. So there's sort of this break between your last day in court and when it's not done that way here, but when the last day in court happens and then the attorneys all go away and do their summing up in writing. And so a whole, basically, year goes by during that process before you get the decision, where we're sitting there at home waiting. And during part of that process, and they were doing the summing up, I took we had an audio tape of the English that was happening in court. I took that and listened to every word in English that our witnesses were saying, and I cross-compared them to every word that was translated into English in those court transcripts, and compared to find every error that was there. And so that, to me, was a whole good 3-4 weeks of my life going back and forth, trying to see what, obviously, the judge didn't really care what was being said in that process, and it was absolutely unacceptable what happened. But I think that just was a statement of how he valued those witnesses and what they were saying.
It was really something new for me to represent a client who follow up every word which is in court. You know, usually we are used, and you know, lawyers are having this feeling that they are controlling in facts and in law, and they don't need any help from others. But I was found in such a situation that I have 3 lawyers beside me that coming to suggest questions, to ideas, and to give me some reference to that this witness had said that, and this witness said that. And in page number 360, it is written so. It was really new for me, and it was for the first time in life that I work with my client on the file. And it was really remarkable to be mentioned, but I studied much of it. I really studied much of it, how you could improve your ability, and you have some senior lawyers without paying them their salary.
I just want to add one. You talked about the ISM while you were talking. I was saying they were also helpful in one other fashion. Cindy and I were staying in the same home with the ISM, Rachel's friends, as witnesses. And for those of you who have been around our office late at night, Cindy and I was trying to sleep in bed. Cindy was in the bedroom with her computer going when the door gets broken open, and Greg and Alice walk in and start to grab Cindy's computer, which to take Cindy's computer away is kind of a surgery. And so Cindy would say, I just have to, and Alice would say, go to sleep. And no, I just have to, and Greg would say, put your computer away. And they did an intervention one night on Cindy and got her computer away at around midnight. So they were very helpful. They're very good friends now when we can see them. It's not nearly as often as we wish.
This question is from Scott Yost. He has written, he cannot speak. Hussein mentioned that in the courtroom, he observed that the Israeli perpetrators often seem to be mentioned by quote-unquote fear, or motivated by quote-unquote fear. Did you see that they feel real, they sense, did you sense that they feel real quote-unquote shame for their actions as well? Or was it that they were very, or wasn't that very human emotions in evidence in the court?
I guess this is a different scale of question, but I was wondering, in the many years since Rachel has passed, what you could describe about your own connection internationally as other people have seen your struggles in this case emerge. How have others reached out to you about parallel human rights struggles that kind of either mirror or somehow connect with Rachel's efforts across borders?
And is there any possibility of any future action in a court of another land or entity? Because I was always struck by and have responded to letters to the editor regarding it's outside of reasonable operation of any kind of item, whether it's a car or a large piece of equipment, that when you see someone, you don't move until you know where they went to.
In regard to the attitude of those who testified, and whether they reflected any shame or emotion about it, I would say across the board, no. You have to keep in mind that we were hearing it all in Hebrew, except for our eyewitnesses. So, and then the fact, and I think many of you probably heard me say this before, but it was Ehud Barak who signed the security certificate that said that the identities of all the people should be secured. And that meant that unless they had appeared in public talking about this on TV, all the people on the ground testified from behind a screen. There's an interesting article, if you'd like to look it up, in the LA Times by Ed Sanders, talking about the feet of, I believe it was the driver, I think the driver, but because that's what he could see in the courtroom. And so he writes about the feet of this person. But what I said that day and what I felt is that certainly the screen and then the words that I heard from the driver, he couldn't remember what time of day Rachel was killed. I just kept thinking if I had done that, I would know whether it was noon or 5, and he couldn't tell you whether it was at noon or at 5 p.m. I think overall our sense is they never thought they'd ever end up in a courtroom. And Craig said, it was like it was just another day at the office in what we sort of heard all the way through. And of course, that's the problem with the whole system, that there isn't accountability, which is why these thousands and thousands of more people have been subjected to this. Maybe somebody, Lynn's question, we are so blessed. Our family is so incredibly blessed with our connections that we have, with the fact that we were in a position when Rachel was killed, she was our youngest, so we were in a position to be able to do what we did. We know families who had similar things happen who could not act quite the same way because they had younger kids to take care of and to create some kind of normal life for them. So we immediately connected, I would say, with the families because, there were 2 other internationals killed on that border within 7 weeks of Rachel's killing, Tom Herndal and James Miller. And they were from the UK. We immediately connected, particularly with the Herndal family. And with, I can't keep up still with the communication. The hardest part is that I carry a lot of guilt around when I don't answer your emails, and let alone, the ones that come from other places. And a lot of times we do hear from people. The one thing I'll say is very quickly, people would come to events where we were speaking who had lost children. And they might not be connected to this issue at all, but I had people say, I just needed to come because you're functioning. And they needed to so we would just talk. And I would listen. Really, I would just listen. And then I learned very quickly, that's not a small club. There are a lot of people that lose children before they should. And so, and that continues to happen. The foundation was just this week we're finalizing, we're going to be the recipient of a grant from a person who lost their only child in a bicycle accident when the child was college and just graduated from college. So, we have those kinds of continuing communications with people from all over the world. We're really blessed. The future action in the courts around our case.
You go, Hussein.
Future?
Yeah, they asked the question about is there any future action?
Yeah.
International court, Spain.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, first of all, I would like to say that I am not expert of international law. And of course, I am not qualified to give a reliable legal opinion about possibilities of bringing such a case in front of the International Criminal Law, the Criminal Court, which was formed after Rome Convention in 2002. But I wonder, and I told the family here, why, for example, it was possible to indict suspected people for the killing of Rafiq al-Hariri, the ex-prime minister of Lebanon, to indict them in this court. And it is not possible to bring to justice the people who were killing Rachel. At least in this case, we know exactly who was the driver. We know the instrument. We know the circumstances. And we have 2,000 pages of minutes in the court, which include crimes against humanity and war crimes. When a high commander declares and witnesses in front of judge in Israeli court that there is no room for civilians wherever there is an army, it means that it is a clear and obvious order to kill any person who presents there. Is this the international law? No. The international law obliges the army to keep the life and to prevent any damage from civilians throughout the war, especially those who are not involved in hostile activity or human rights protectors, defenders. And Rachel was a human rights defender. In the end of the day, she was not carrying any arm. She was carrying a microphone. She was carrying a slogan which says, peace. Don't destroy the houses of the people in Rafah. So it's a question of intention. To what extent we could have the support of some bodies to bring this case in front of the general prosecutor of the criminal court in criminal court. So I think that it is a question of time. There is no passage of time on crimes of war. And to my knowledge, and maybe I am subjective, but in very objective criteria, Rachel was killed maliciously. There is no other explanation why it happened. And throughout 3 months, 3 activists, European, were killed. Tom Horrendale, James Miller, and Rachel Corrie. And the first was Rachel. They wanted to stop this solidarity from the international solidarity movement to be in the road of Philadelphia. Yeah, it's called Philadelphia Road, unbelievable. Yeah. It's Salah ad-Din Road, it's Philadelphia Road. And in 2007, Israel disengaged from this area. Now, how we can do it? The United States Embassy in Tel Aviv relied on the court ruling. Although once the consulate was in court, and he was sitting nearby the family, hearing translation from Hebrew to English. But he looks like Arabs, but he is taller than standard Arabs. And the judge was angry because there is some amazing voice in the room. And he crowded on him, you, stand up. I hurried to the judge. I said, look, this is the American consulate. He said, doesn't mind to me. Who is he? He should look like a child here. This was said by the judge of Israel to the American consulate. But what had been done with it? Nothing. Yeah. because of the unconditional support of the United States to whatever Israel do in the occupied areas. 3.1 million each year is given to Israel to the military support. 3 billion, yeah, and 3 others for the civil support. More than had been what is being given in 2012 to South America, to Eastern Europe, to some other areas of the United States. Altogether, we're receiving from the United States less than the small Israel. It is a signal of support. It's a signal of support when Netanyahu has all the support from the Congress and from the evangelist Americans. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for your